November 22nd, 1963, Dallas, Texas, a day that would forever be etched into the annals of history. The world watched in horror as President John F. Kennedy, riding in an open motorcade, was struck down by an assassin's bullets. The motorcade, a symbol of hope and progress, was suddenly transformed into a scene of chaos and despair. The events of that day sent shockwaves across the globe, leaving an indelible mark on history. People from all walks of life, from every corner of the world, were united in their grief and disbelief. A young, charismatic leader brimming with promise and potential was gone. John F. Kennedy, with his vision for a brighter future, had inspired millions. His speeches, filled with hope and determination, had resonated deeply with the American people and beyond. In his place, a void, a question that has haunted historians and captivated imaginations ever since. What if JFK had lived? What if the trajectory of history had been altered by a single moment of fate? This question, seemingly simple yet profoundly complex, invites us to step into the realm of alternate history. It challenges us to consider the myriad ways in which the world might have been different. It beckons us to imagine a world where that fateful day in Dallas unfolded differently, a world where the motorcade took a different route, where the bullets missed their mark, where history took a different turn. A world where JFK's presidency continued and the course of history charted a new path. Imagine the policies he might have enacted, the speeches he might have given, the impact he might have had on the world stage. The assassination of John F. Kennedy remains one of the most pivotal moments in American history. It was a brutal end to a presidency brimming with hope and ambition, a moment that changed the course of history in an instant. It was a brutal end to a presidency brimming with hope and ambition. His time in office, though short, was marked by significant achievements and a vision for a better future. It left a nation in mourning, grappling with the unthinkable. The streets were filled with people, their faces etched with sorrow, their hearts heavy with loss. The nation came together in its grief, united by a shared sense of loss and a longing for what might have been. And it left behind a legacy forever intertwined with tragedy and unfulfilled potential. Memorials were erected, speeches were given, and the memory of JFK was enshrined in the hearts and minds of the people. But what if that potential had been realized? What if the initiatives he had started had come to fruition? What if the dreams he had for the nation had been fulfilled? What if JFK had survived that fateful day in Dallas? What if the course of history had been altered by a single moment of fate? These questions linger in the minds of historians and the public alike. These are the questions that fuel our exploration into an alternate history, a world where Camelot never met its tragic end, a world where the promise of JFK's presidency was fully realized and the course of history was forever changed. A surviving JFK would have faced a nation still grappling with the social and political upheavals of the early 1960s. The civil rights movement, gaining momentum and demanding equality, would have presented both challenges and opportunities. Vietnam loomed large on the international stage, a conflict escalating with each passing day. Navigating these turbulent waters would have demanded all of JFK's political acumen. Would he have doubled down on his new frontier ideals, pushing for bold social reforms and ambitious domestic programs? Or would the realities of a second term with its inherent political complexities have tempered his ambitions? The answers, of course, remain elusive. Historians can only speculate, drawing upon JFK's personality, political instincts, and the historical context of the time. Some argue that a second term would have allowed JFK to solidify his legacy, enacting lasting change in areas like civil rights and poverty. Others suggest that the pressures of the Cold War and the escalating conflict in Vietnam would have constrained his ability to enact his domestic agenda. Ultimately, the trajectory of JFK's second term exists only in the realm of speculation. It is a canvas upon which we can project our hopes, our fears, and our interpretations of the man and his vision for America. John F. Kennedy's stance on civil rights was complex, a blend of idealism and political pragmatism. He was a leader who understood the importance of equality, but was also acutely aware of the political landscape he had to navigate. His speeches often reflected a deep commitment to justice, yet his actions were sometimes tempered by the need to maintain political alliances and support. While he campaigned on a platform of equality, he was initially cautious in pushing for sweeping federal action on civil rights. This caution was not due to a lack of belief in the cause, but rather a strategic approach to ensure he could garner the necessary support from various factions within the government. His early presidency saw him taking measured steps, often focusing on less controversial issues to build a foundation for more significant changes. The political realities of the time, with Southern Democrats holding considerable power in Congress, made it a delicate balancing act. These leaders were staunchly opposed to civil rights reforms, and their influence meant that any aggressive push could result in legislative gridlock or even backlash that could stall other critical initiatives. Kennedy had to tread carefully, weighing the immediate needs against long-term goals. However, the growing momentum of the civil rights movement, with its powerful displays of non-violent resistance and calls for justice, put increasing pressure on the Kennedy administration. The movement's leaders, such as Martin Luther King Jr., were relentless in their pursuit of equality, organizing marches, sit-ins, and other forms of peaceful protest that captured the nation's attention. Their efforts highlighted the urgent need for federal intervention. The images of brutality against peaceful protesters beamed into living rooms across the nation became impossible to ignore. These harrowing scenes of violence against unarmed citizens, including women and children, shocked the conscience of many Americans and galvanized public opinion. The stark contrast between the peaceful demonstrators and the aggressive responses they faced underscored the moral imperative for change. It was in this context that JFK began to embrace a more active role in advancing civil rights. Recognizing the growing demand for justice and equality, he started to take bolder steps. His administration began drafting comprehensive civil rights legislation, and he used his platform to speak out more forcefully against racial discrimination. This shift marked a significant evolution in his presidency. He delivered a landmark address to the nation on June 11, 1963, calling for comprehensive civil rights legislation and declaring racial equality a moral imperative. In this speech, Kennedy articulated a vision of America where all citizens, regardless of race, could enjoy the same rights and opportunities. He framed the issue not just as a political challenge, but as a fundamental question of human dignity and justice. This speech, delivered just months before his death, signaled a potential turning point in JFK's approach to civil rights. It was a moment that many saw as the beginning of a new era in American politics, where the federal government would take a more proactive role in ensuring equality. Kennedy's words resonated deeply with many Americans, offering hope that meaningful change was on the horizon. A surviving JFK would have faced the daunting task of shepherding his proposed civil rights legislation through a Congress deeply divided along racial lines. The debates would have been intense, with fierce opposition from those who sought to maintain the status quo. Yet there was also a growing coalition of lawmakers and activists ready to support the cause, inspired by the movement's momentum and Kennedy's leadership. Would he have been able to rally enough support to overcome the resistance of Southern Democrats and deliver on his promise of equal rights for all Americans? This question remains one of the great what-ifs of American history. What is clear, however, is that Kennedy's evolving stance on civil rights laid the groundwork for future progress, inspiring subsequent leaders to continue the fight for justice and equality. Vietnam, a conflict that would come to define a generation, cast a long shadow over JFK's presidency. The war, which began as a struggle for independence from colonial rule, soon became a battleground for Cold War ideologies. The United States, fearing the spread of communism, saw Vietnam as a crucial front in the global struggle against the Soviet Union and its allies. The escalating Cold War, with its domino theory and fear of communist expansion, drew the United States deeper into the quagmire of Southeast Asia. American policymakers believed that if one country in the region fell to communism, others would inevitably follow, leading to a cascade of communist takeovers throughout Asia. This belief, known as the domino theory, became a driving force behind US involvement in Vietnam. JFK, initially hesitant to commit large numbers of American troops, found himself increasingly entangled in the conflict. His administration faced mounting pressure from military advisors and political allies who argued that a strong American presence was necessary to support the South Vietnamese government and prevent a communist takeover. Despite his reservations, JFK authorized the deployment of military advisors and increased financial aid to South Vietnam. By 1963, the United States had over 16,000 military advisors in Vietnam, providing training and support to the South Vietnamese army. These advisors played a crucial role in helping the South Vietnamese forces develop their capabilities, but their presence also signaled a deeper American commitment to the conflict. As the situation on the ground grew more complex, the line between advisory support and direct military involvement began to blur. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, with the communist Viet Cong gaining ground and the South Vietnamese government teetering on the brink of collapse. The Viet Cong, supported by North Vietnam, launched increasingly bold attacks, undermining the stability of the South Vietnamese regime. Corruption and political infighting further weakened the South Vietnamese government, making it difficult for them to effectively counter the communist insurgency. JFK's true intentions regarding Vietnam remain a subject of debate. Some believe he was committed to a long-term military engagement, while others argue that he sought a way to disengage from the conflict. His public statements often reflected a desire to support South Vietnam, but private conversations and memos suggest he was wary of becoming too deeply involved. Some historians point to evidence suggesting that he was considering a gradual withdrawal of American advisors after the 1964 election. They argue that JFK recognized the limitations of American power and the challenges of fighting a guerrilla war in unfamiliar terrain. His administration had begun exploring options for reducing the U.S. footprint in Vietnam, but his assassination left these plans unfinished. Others argue that he was committed to preventing a communist takeover of South Vietnam and would have escalated American involvement if necessary. They point to his repeated affirmations of support for the South Vietnamese government and his willingness to increase military aid as evidence that he was prepared to take more drastic measures to ensure the region did not fall to communism. In the alternate timeline we're exploring, where JFK survives Dallas, Vietnam remains a defining challenge. His survival would have allowed him to continue shaping U.S. policy in Vietnam, potentially altering the course of the conflict. Would he have been able to navigate the complex political and military landscape to find a path to peace? Or would he have been drawn deeper into the war? Would he have been able to extricate the United States from the conflict? The pressures of the Cold War, combined with the fierce determination of the Viet Cong and the instability of the South Vietnamese government, would have posed significant challenges. JFK's leadership and decision-making would have been put to the ultimate test as he sought to balance the demands of national security with the desire to avoid a protracted and costly war. Or would the pressures of the Cold War and the perceived threat of communism have led him down the same path as his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson? Johnson's escalation of the war, driven by similar fears and strategic considerations, resulted in a deepening American involvement that ultimately proved disastrous. The question remains, could JFK have charted a different course, or was the United States' fate in Vietnam already sealed by the time he took office?